Hello friends! Ever wonder how digital brushes compare to their traditional counterparts? Well, it's time to find out. In this video, I'm going to create a drawing using the new Ohuhu colored pencils. Then I'll attempt to replicate the look in Procreate. Before we dive in, I'd love if you'd like, comment, subscribe, and watch till the very end because it really helps the channel. Okay, let's start with supplies and setup. I have a few different sets of colored pencils, but Ohuhu recently sent me a set of their new Halawa oil-based colored pencils, so I'm going to give these a try. I've heard great things about these pencils. Apparently, they're comparable to really good quality brands like Faber-Castell, but for a fraction of the cost. So I'm excited to see how they perform. Once I got them all sharpened, I did some swatching, and for this I just used the swatch card that came with the set. And this is a set of 72, so there's a pretty good range of colors. The paper I used for my actual drawing was Strathmore Bristol, which is nice and smooth, and it's about as thick as cardstock. I'm not drawing from reference for this piece. I just whipped up this whimsical little illustration, so I had the freedom to be creative with my color selection. I decided to go with a fairly simple palette of complementary colors. So I chose a range of oranges, and of course the complement to that is blue, so I chose a range of blues as well. Since the blues are such cool colors, and I'll be using a lot of blue in this piece, I also added pinks and reds to help warm things up a bit more and balance out those cool tones. For the digital version of this drawing, I used the Procreate app on the iPad Pro, and I had my canvas set to 4000 by 3000 pixels at 300 dpi. The brush I used is called Dusky, which is a default brush from the Procreate library, and it's located in the pencil set. I referenced the colors from my analog drawing and tried to match them as closely as possible to build the digital palette. Some colors I pulled from old palettes, and for other colors I used the color disc and just tried to eyeball it and match it as closely as possible. Once I got my palette figured out, I transferred my sketch to the Bristol board. It's really light so you can barely see it on camera. And then I started laying down the first few layers of color. I've learned that the best way to approach colored pencil drawings is to slowly build up light layers of color rather than going in with dark, heavy marks right off the bat. It takes more time, but it's easier to get smooth transitions and subtle shifts in color when you do it this way. It didn't take long for me to get comfortable with these pencils. They're nice and creamy, so the color went down smoothly, especially on this Bristol paper, and layering was really easy. Now, even with a set of 72, of course, there's still a limit to the number of colors available. So to get a broader range, you have to apply a little color theory and use different colors to create more options for value and saturation. In this case, I added a couple different browns to the orange to create a darker value for the shadows, and added yellow to create highlights in other areas. On the flowers, I used pink as the base, then built up multiple shades of red to add value contrast. On the leaves, I started with a bright blue and then worked my way down to the darkest blue in the set. Then I added this dark blue-green to deepen the color. When I added another layer of the darkest blue on top of that, the color became even richer. I first attempted to use back and forth strokes to put down the first layer of color, but I quickly realized that created very obvious lines. So instead, I used the side of the pencil tip to get a smoother fill. It still took some trial and error to make the color as smooth as possible. Sometimes broad strokes worked well, and other times circular motions were more effective. I just had to play around for a while until I could create something that looked natural. In terms of building up the color, I took the same approach as I did with the traditional pencils. I added a few different colors to help create a more interesting layered look rather than just using one color for each object. The challenge here is that I had to be careful with the digital brush because with more and more layers, the color would quickly get too solid and flat, meaning I'd lose that pencil texture. So I really couldn't get too heavy-handed with the layering. Now, unlike with traditional pencils, there are almost infinite color options with digital, so it's much easier to tweak and adjust and change colors as you go. Another convenient perk about working digitally is that you can layer colors at any time. So for the traditional version, I had to work around this leaf shape when I colored the mushroom, but I didn't have to do that here because I could just draw the foreground leaf on a different layer. These pencils sharpened pretty well, and even with a really sharp point, they were quite sturdy, so I didn't experience any breakage really. The wood on these pencils does get a little rough when you sharpen them though, and that was whether I used an electric or manual sharpener. So it's not as smooth as some of the pricier brands, but that was a minor issue and it didn't seem to affect the performance of the Ohuhu pencils. There's not a ton of detail in this illustration, but with a freshly sharpened pencil, I was able to get nice crisp lines where I needed them, and I was able to fill in some pretty small areas. This brush did a decent enough job with the details. Unlike with a real pencil, I can't get a really nice sharpened point, so there's always a slightly rough edge to the line work. But it did help that I could zoom in really close with the digital drawing, so I could add a little extra detail like some shadows and highlights on those small lines. The last step was to add more vibrancy, so I went through and added a few more layers to increase the saturation. I added more layers of pink and red to the flowers, and in some areas I added a little orange to punch up that color even more. I used firm pressure on the last layer to burnish and smooth everything out, and I used this really bright pink to help blend everything together. I would have liked the blend to be a tiny bit smoother, but overall, these pencils did a really good job. At the last minute, I decided to add a bit more detail to this flower, and I was pleased to see that I could still add more color, even though I had already put down several layers. I did have to use really firm pressure, but the color showed up well and it blended better than I expected. Again, with firm pressure and some burnishing, I was able to increase the saturation on the leaves and make that color even deeper and richer. I made one more pass on the mushroom cap to saturate and blend those colors. And then I was all done. I really love how colorful and vibrant this piece turned out. With the traditional pencils, blending was the last step, but I didn't do any blending with the smudge tool on this digital version because again, I didn't want to lose the grain pattern which helps give the look of a colored pencil drawing. So instead, I slowly added more layers and used circular motions to transition from one color to another. Just like I did with the traditional drawing, I used bright colors to make everything more vibrant and saturated. Finally, I added those last few lines to replicate what I did on the analog version. And here's the final result. Now let's see both drawings side by side. Well, the first thing that stands out to me is that my color match wasn't very accurate. It was close, but it didn't quite hit the mark. I can also see that although the digital pencil I used had a nice grain, it couldn't capture the texture of a real pencil. So the digital version still ends up looking really smooth, and one could argue maybe a little too polished compared to the real thing. I'm also surprised to see that the digital version did not capture the same vibrancy as the traditional version. Even though I can get really bright, vibrant colors on the iPad, there's still an intensity to the colors on the traditional version that didn't really come through on the digital drawing. I don't think that one version is necessarily better than the other, but they are definitely different. Big thanks to Ohuhu for the colored pencils. I really enjoyed experimenting with them. And if you'd like to give these pencils a try, I've included a link in the description for where you can find them, along with a discount code you can use. If you enjoyed this video, remember to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. Thanks for watching.